picture of God's Spirit on their life. You're familiar with Psalm 23, that famous psalm from David in the book of Psalms where he says, you anoint my head with oil. What is that a picture of? It's a picture of God's Spirit. In the New Testament, when someone was sick, they were instructed to bring their sick to the leaders of the church so the leaders could anoint them with oil. Now, the leaders of the church didn't heal them, and the oil didn't heal them. God healed them, but the oil was representative of God's Spirit. This woman says, I only have a little bit of oil. That's all I've got. Just a little bit of God, a little bit of the Spirit, just a little bit of oil. Just a few Skittles in the bottom of the jar. Elijah said this to her. Go around, ask all your neighbors for, now this is significant, ask them for empty jars. Remember the title? Empty jars full of Skittles. Ask them for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few and then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars. And as each one is, here it is, as each one is filled, put it to one side. So she left him. And she shut the door behind her and her sons. Now this is the miracle we usually focus in on when we study this story. It's pretty remarkable. They brought the jars to her and she kept pouring. She kept pouring. She only had a little bit of oil. Then she has all these empty jars. So she starts pouring the little bit of oil into the empty jars. And she kept pouring. And she kept pouring. And she kept pouring. It says when all the jars were, y'all see it? Full. Y'all see it? When all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another one. But he replied, there's not a jar left. And that's when the oil stopped flowing. The oil stopped flowing when all the jars were full. Why? God can't fill full jars. That's why. God can't fill them. Write this down. God fills empty jars. That's what God does. He fills empty jars. And so maybe the reason you have so little of God in your jar is you have too much of everything else. When your jar is so full of everything else, you will only have a little bit of what you need the most. So let me ask you, what's filling up your jar? What's filling your jar? What's in it? What's in your jar? I'll illustrate it like this for a lot of us. For a lot of us, you know, we've got this thing called work in our jar, and it's filling us up, man. It is filling us up. If you're a student, if you have homework in your jar. If you're a parent or a student, you have sports and more hobbies and travel sports, and you have all kinds of things in your jar. And then you start getting real about your jar, and you start to discover, gosh, I've got some sin in my jar. Maybe an addiction that you won't let go of. Maybe some bitterness that you're holding on to, some unforgiveness. Maybe in your jar is this incessant need to make everybody else like you, and so you'll do anything and everything for their approval. Maybe that's what's sitting in your jar. Maybe in your jar is fear. Or maybe in your jar is anxiety. Maybe in your jar is selfishness. What's in your jar? Unforgiveness. So much in your jar. And what happens for so many of us is that our jar gets full of so many other things. You only have a little bit of room for what you really need the most. Are y'all listening? You fill up your jar with so much other stuff. It's no wonder you only have a few Skittles. at the bottom of the jar. I'm trying to teach you today this principle that the oil flowed when the jar was empty. And so if you look at your life today and you have to say, Pastor, the oil's not flowing, then I would ask you, what's filling your jar? Because if you want the oil to flow, if you want the breeze to blow, if you want the wind to come, you got to empty your jar. And I felt like what God told me to tell you is empty your jars. Because some of you have jars so full of so much that it's led you to have so little of God. What does that look like? Well, it looks like being so completely real and honest and transparent with God that you say, God, I'm emptying out my jar. I'm laying it aside. I'm taking my pride out. I'm taking away my sin. I'm setting aside all those efforts to try to be in the know and surrounded by everybody and liked by everybody else. I'm just gonna take it. I'm gonna take it out. I'm gonna break away from social media for a little while. I'm gonna stop watching the news for a little while. I'm gonna pick up the phone and call that person that I haven't forgiven yet. And I'm gonna say, listen, I know we've been distant and disconnected, but I want us to get our relationship right. I forgive you. I don't know what it looks like for you. It might mean canceling some things in your schedule. It might mean reprioritizing some time. It might mean making some margin. It might mean doing the hard work, the profound work, the difficult work of really soul searching to say, what's in my jar that's keeping me from God? And then deciding I'm going to take all of that out, because in order for me to receive from God, my jar has to be empty. And y'all, can I just tell you the most amazing thing will happen in your life? That if you'll do the work of pouring out your jar, emptying out your jar, making room in your jar for God, the most incredible thing will happen, because when you get all the other stuff out of your jar, you start to get all of God. And He comes along and He starts to fill up your jar with more and more and more and more and more of Himself until you're full to overflowing.